Hey guys, we are now into June, so I thought this would be a good time to look back over my spring flowers, do a little bit of review of how they all did, and look at what I'm going to be doing differently next year. For anyone that doesn't know, my name is Peggy and I am in my third season of growing a cut flower garden here on my allotment in Kanagawa Prefecture, Japan, which is just south of Tokyo in USDA Zone 9B. Thanks for checking out my channel. Okay, so I'm going to go through this in the order that the flowers bloomed for me in the spring. So the first thing that I had at the very beginning of the season were my hellebore. I don't have them in here. Also, my acalygia and my hyacinth came up really quickly. They were all in my home garden, but I would like to have more in this garden this year, except the hellebore. Hellebore are really expensive, and I don't think many people grow them from seed. They tend to be a plant that you kind of put in and they come back bigger and bigger each year. So I only have 2 hellebore. From those 2 hellebore, I think I cut about 4 stems each, but those stems lasted so long in the vase, and also they dried really nicely as well. So I have put them in my garden at home, and they hopefully will be growing on in a shady place. They already look nice and big and healthy with their leaves, and I'm hoping that I'll get more off of them next spring. But if I had a bigger garden or a bigger permanent garden, it would be full of hellebore. I find that the doubles lasted longer than the singles and they dried better than the singles. But the singles are equally as beautiful. I had the really dark kind of chocolatey purple ones and a white one. They both dried really well. The white one did get a little bit of browning to it. The purple one actually dried a little bit more pink than I was expecting, but it's still a very deep colour and it's beautiful. Love them. So I would have more hellebore in the garden. I would have more hyacinth. My hyacinth here in 9B tend to come up really early. I mean, I have my hyacinth at the same time as I have my daffodil coming up. In fact, a lot of my hyacinth had passed by the time my last daffodil were coming through. So they're definitely a very early crop for me here. And I really like them. Again, I don't have them here. I have them in my home garden, which is a really shady garden. And the part that I'm growing them in is underneath other taller shrubs. And they came through really big and really tall. So I'm thinking that I would like to get more hyacinth bulbs in the allotment this year. But I might actually grow them on under shade cloth. And see if I can get those really nice big long stems on them again, because although I was using them a lot in single vases, bud vases, now they do have an incredible scent on them, so if you have a huge bunch of them it can be really overpowering, especially if you've got them in a small area in your house. I tend to display my flowers in the genkan, which is kind of like your Japanese entrance porch, and it's really small. It's about 1.5 meters by 2 meters, so if I had a huge bunch of hyacinth in there, it would hit you in the face when you walked through the door, not necessarily in a good way. But I would like to have longer stems on them, so I could maybe look at making handheld bouquets to be giving to people with those longer stems. But I love them and I want to get more of them in my garden. I also had some acalygia in the garden. Now I didn't grow these from seeds. I had these in pots and I'd planted them out in the garden, but they came through, and again I got about 4 stems from each one. Now I had the acalygia chocolate soldier, which I absolutely loved. I like those darker colours in my flowers. Someone recently in the comments had commented on one of my zinnia videos where I said I wasn't keen on the bright reds and yellows. I much preferred the kind of muted browns and peaches, and they'd referred to them as the dead or dying aesthetic, which I kind of guess it is, but I like it, each to their own. So these chocolate soldier were along the same lines, and they went really well with the dark hellebore as well. But also they are on long stems and they kind of dangle about and are twinkly. And there was nothing else in the garden like them, and it added an extra element of something, and I really liked that. So I would like to have more acalygia in my garden as well. So hellebore, acalygia, hyacinth were the main ones, and then daffodil. And I did have daffodil growing down here. You can see I've still got them tied up as the leaves die back for me. I loved my daffodil. I had lots of different varieties. I think my favourite was the Sir Winston Churchill. It was a really nice bloom. It had about 3 flowers on the top, 2 or 3 flowers on the top, and it had a beautiful scent. But again, daffodil bulbs here are very expensive, so I didn't have very many in. I would like these to divide and become a really big nice patch for me, but that is obviously going to take time. They say you get about 25% more every year, so over 4 years your daffodils will double. I only get this allotment garden for 4 years, so I'm hoping I might get a few more than that. But I did love them, absolutely love them. So they were the very first flowers for me in the garden. So the next thing to come up were my anemone, and these come up really early for me as well. I started getting these kind of, the first few came up at the end of February, but they were teeny tiny, and I mean literally I was panicking. It looked like the flowers were just coming up straight on top of the soil with no stem at all. But I kept cutting and I kept cutting, and eventually they did get to a good size, so I was getting usable stems by about mid-March with these. And you can see they're still coming. They're starting to get shorter on me again, but they're definitely still coming. Now I did actually call it on these last week because I didn't think they would last another week, but here we go, I've got another load. And at that point, I calculated that from the 20 plants I have producing flowers for me in here, I had got 7.5 stems off each plant. Now, I've looked back over the Lenny Larkin's book, Farming for Profitability, which actually has a crop yield table in it, and she was getting 8. That's not bad, right? I got 7.5, she got 8. The thing is, I would like these to be bigger. I still want them to be on longer stems, but I also want just bigger flowers. They're not quite matching up to what I'm seeing elsewhere. I know they say don't compare, but when nobody else is growing around me, I've only got the internet to compare with other people to see what these should look like and how big they should be getting. So I think I will be growing these again next year, but I need to learn how to feed them properly and make sure that these guys are getting enough of whatever it is they need to make big flowers. The other thing I did slightly different this year was, because these come up so early, I don't usually have anything to go with them, and I end up making arrangements that are just an anemone. And so I tried to offset them a little bit with my Ranunculus this year. So the first year I pre-soaked and pre-sprouted my anemone and my Ranunculus at the same time, and my anemone came up a clear month earlier than my Ranunculus. So this year I waited 2 weeks before I started these, and I started my Ranunculus first, hoping that there would be more of an overlap. And there was more of an overlap, but mainly because these guys lasted so long. They actually came up about the same time again, with this one coming up, I'd say maybe 3 weeks earlier than the Ranunculus. So it might be that I have to hold off on these even longer, or I just have to deal with the fact that there's going to be a point where I just have an anemone to play with, and they're going to be in arrangements by themselves. But I still really like them. I got a good yield off of them. I just need to try and get them bigger. Behind them, I had my freesia. Now, you can look back on videos I've done before about what went wrong with my freesia. I planted the bulbs, they came up absolutely beautiful, and then we had a real cold snap and they all died back and they didn't recover, and I was absolutely gutted because my freesia should have been flowering about the same time as my anemone to make a nice companion. But they just didn't do it this year. Now, all of those bulbs are still in the ground. They should come up for me next year, but I am going to do a slightly different planting. Possibly. I want to get more freesia in the garden anyway, so I'm going to do a little experiment where I'll leave these ones in the ground and see how they come up, but I'll also start a new patch. But both of those will be under a tunnel. I think the wind really affected them when the cold snap came. It wasn't necessarily the cold, but it was very windy, and that just dried them out and shriveled them up. So I'm going to be putting them under a low tunnel, and I might actually try and put a frost cloth on them. And this is because in the local shop here, the kind of farm shop where they sell some very few locally grown flowers, I was seeing freesia being sold, and they were massively long. I've never in my life seen such long freesia. But then the ones in my garden, which have started to grow underneath a jasmine bush and so are in the shade, got really, really long for me as well this year. And I thought, oh, hold on. So this year I am going to try putting them under a low tunnel to protect them from the wind and to protect them from that cold snap that comes. But I'm also going to be putting a shade cloth on the top just to see if I can make them try and stretch up for the sun and get really, really nice, big, long stems. That is my experiment for next year. But hopefully with the protection of the tunnel, I will be getting a lot more freesia next year. But I was so upset when they didn't come this year. So upset. Okay, so the next to come up were my Ranunculus, and I've done a whole video about my Ranunculus and the crop yield that I got from them, and I'll link that below. But spoiler, I got 3.5 stems per plant, and the in the Lenny Larkin book again, she claims that she got 7 stems per plant. So I'm about half. You know, I'm rocking it on the anemone, not so great on the Ranunculus. So I need to work on that. But I had a bit of a rocky start with these. So I had used the corms that I had in my garden from last year. I dug them up, I divided them, and I stored them, and then I bought some new bulbs, and I wanted to compare the old bulbs with the new bulbs and see what the difference was. But when I started to pre-sprout them, all of the new bulbs got moldy and rotted, and I couldn't use any of them. So everything that went into the garden this year was actually second year ranunculus. And because of that, I'm actually quite impressed with how they did. Most people that are growing flowers for profit are replanting the ranunculus corms every year. They buy new corms. Because the production just slows down on them. So I was actually pretty impressed that any of these came back again. And again, I am going to leave these in the ground. But much like my freesia, I'm going to have a second patch of new corms that I buy. The difference this time is that in my zone in 9B, I don't need to pre-sprout. The reason people pre-sprout is to make sure that they have viable corms, so they're not wasting room in their garden, because ranunculus do take so long. I planted mine out in October and they're flowering kind of end of March, beginning of April. So if you've waited that long to find out that your corms are bad, then you've just got blank spaces in your garden, and that's why people pre-sprout. But I don't think that's necessary where I am, and on the size that I'm growing on, it's really not that necessary. So this time I will pre-soak my corms to make sure they're nice and juicy, but once I've got them pre-soaked, I am just going to put them straight into the ground without pre-sprouting them, and see if they do better. Hopefully that will stop them getting moldy, and give me a nice strong plant. But again, with these, like the freesia, I will be putting them under frost cloth. These guys looked great going into kind of December time, but when that really cold snap hit, it was actually about mid-February, it really knocked these guys back. It killed off a lot of them that had been looking good just disappeared. So although I managed to get ranunculus, I didn't get as many as the corms that I planted in the ground should have given me. So yeah, this one is going to be under a low tunnel as well, possibly just with a frost cloth on it, but yet to be decided. So no pre-sprouting, and definitely under some kind of tunnel to protect them from the cold snaps that we get here, and hopefully I will get a better crop yield on them next year. Okay, so at the same time as my ranunculus were blooming, I had my tulip in here as well. Now, again, I don't have very many tulip, not as many as I would like, but I'm a bit iffy about buying tulip bulbs because they have so much fungicide on them. They're not great for your soil. There's lots of issues that I've talked about in previous videos. But I have some bulbs now. A lot of these were ones that I had dug up from my garden from the previous year and pre-planted and planted into here, and I also bought some new varieties which were similar to what I had anyway. And I had mixed results with these. So the ones at the front I absolutely loved. These were the really dark purpley, almost black ones, and these were great. They gave me huge big long stems and I absolutely loved them. I've also found out that they dry really well. I've never really tried to dry a tulip before, but it has dried. Now they're incredibly fragile as a dried flower. You have to be careful in what you use them on. I don't think they would hold up in like a dried wreath or something, but I like to do my dried flowers in big tall kind of apocryphy vases or glass things, so they're kind of protected in there and they're good for that. But I love those. After that I had a kind of soft pink one which I'd grown before, and I love it because I think it looks a bit like a water lily when it comes up. It has that really nice, these are all doubles, so they're really ruffly and lovely. And I had some kind of coppery orange ones which I love the colour of, perfectly match my trousers randomly. But both of those were on much shorter stems. Some of the pink ones were almost unusable. There were also some yellow ones. I'm not sure where they came from. I think they were maybe a variation of the peach that just hadn't come through as strong in the peach and so looked yellow. It was on a tiny stem. A lot of them actually rotted in the garden. We were getting a lot of rain. And so yeah, I wasn't really loving those at all. And then the other thing I had in here were Peggy Wonders, which I bought because they've got my name in them. Hello. And I really wasn't sure what to expect because they weren't the prettiest looking on the packet. They kind of look a bit like a cabbage, a kind of little cabbage that are white in the middle and purple on the outside. But they were actually really pretty. They were incredibly short, but on one stem I was getting 4 or 5 heads. I mean, I've never seen that on a tulip before, and it was really cool. And I managed to make a couple of handhelds from them, and I had some in vases as well, and they were fine. They held up fine, and I liked them just because they were a bit weird looking, and they went beautifully with my vintage brown stock and some of the snapdragon that had started to come through by that point as well, because they were the last of my tulips to bloom. So I like having the tulip in the garden. I'll keep them there just because they're bulbs. I'm not going to pull them out. That's just a waste of money. But I think going forward, I need to be really careful about what variety of tulip I pick to make sure that I'm getting ones that have really nice long stems. Now, usually that if you're getting them from a reputable supplier, it should tell you on the label how tall your tulip should get. So it's just something to look out for. If you are using them for cut flowers, to make sure that you check and see how long a stem you're actually going to get on them, because a lot of the pink and orange ones were almost unusable. They were absolutely beautiful, but just short. I'm also short. I mean, it's not always a bad thing. I'm not a cut flower though. Oh, it's sunny. While I'm down this end of the garden, I'll also mention a few other things. This is my geum. Now, I planted my geum out after my daffodil had finished, and although it has got bigger since I planted it out, it's not done very much, and it's definitely not given me flowers. And this should be a late spring flower, so I should be expecting to see things on it now. This is a perennial, so it's maybe just that it's taking its time to get established, and I'm going to have to wait until next year before I get anything off it. But I was expecting flowers off this year, and that has not happened. But like I say, it's a perennial, so I'm not stressing about it. I just have to be patient, which I'm not really known for. Same goes with the Sweet William here. So this is my Sweet William and my allium. Now, I had two different types of allium in here. I had a shorter one and this bigger one, and the shorter one just died in the cold snap as well. But again, it's a bulb, so I'm hoping it's going to come back for me next year. This one is just starting to get its wee bobbly bobbles on it, so I'm hoping that's going to open up pretty soon for me. And this one is so twisty and weird and snake-like. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. So yeah, I'm hoping my allium will come back for me. My Sweet William also I thought would be flowering by now. And again, this is a perennial, so it will definitely get bigger and come back for me next year. I'm still hoping that it might give me something. But I mean, there are no signs of flowers on this at all. So I'm hoping that next year I will have flowers in spring from this and from my allium and from my geum. But this year, it looks like that's not going to happen. I might get some from the Sweet William later on in the season. But yeah, I was expecting more from this. But it's not dead, it's still there, I just have to wait. Okay, down here at the other end of the garden is where I had my stock, and you can see I've only got one piece left right at the back there. I put in some vintage brown stock and then just a stock mix, and I really liked it. It came up really well this year. It was tall, it lasted well in the vase, it smelled beautiful. The flowers smell beautiful. Stock is a member of the Brassica family, which is broccoli, basically. And it is known for being a dirty flower because it turns the water bad so quickly. And when you empty the water, when it's dirty, it does just smell like bad broccoli. So be aware that if you are having this in your house, you do want to be doing at least every 2 days a water change. I would recommend every day, because in the humidity I get here in zone 9B, it goes bad pretty quickly. So yeah, it does get a bit gross, but as long as you're changing out the water, it's beautiful, it's lovely. So I was really, really happy with that. The vintage brown stock is possibly one of my favourite flowers. I just absolutely love the depth of the colour and the weirdness of the colour. I am having slight difficulties in finding things to match it with at the same time. You know, your spring flowers tend to be a lot of the kind of pastel-y colours, and it just didn't quite look right. Although I did find that the apricot stock I had in here went really well with it, so that was nice. And my Peggy Wonder tulips also look great. I had some of the Miracle Yellow stock, and by itself it's really, really beautiful. It's kind of a soft buttery yellow, and it was really nice, but I found that I couldn't really match it with anything else that I had in the garden at that point. If my daffodil had come up, or I had more daffodil that could stretch out into the season, that would have looked lovely together, but my timings just didn't quite work out there. But overall, I'm really happy with my stock, or I was really happy with my stock until I went to the shop that I mentioned before with the giant freesia, because there I was seeing stock that was multi-branching. They were selling cut stock, and it was one stem with 3 flowering heads come off it, and I've never seen that before, and I want it. And I don't know if this is a new thing that's been bred in Japan, and I'm just gonna have to look here for it. If you guys have seen it anywhere, let me know what I should be looking for, and I'll let you know if I find it. But yeah, they had this stock that looked exactly the same, and they had it in the nice apricot colours, and they had it in the soft yellow colours, but 1 stem, 3 stock heads. That's what I want for next year, so I'm on a bit of a seed hunt to see if I can find that. But yeah, stock was great. The other thing I did with my stock is that I interplanted it with my Achillea, my yarrow that's coming in here, and my lupin. And my lupin are really small, I don't know what's going on there. But that worked out really well timing wise. I actually started this stuff at home from seed and then moved it into the garden about the same time, as I put the stalk out. And I was worried that the stalk was going to shade it, and it did, but as I've cut the stalk, this has come up really nice and strong, and you can see that I'm now starting to get some flowers coming from it as well. So this is a pairing that I'm really, really happy with. Also, I didn't mention with my tulip, I've done that in between my dahlia, and again, that worked out perfectly. Just as the tulip were coming off, my dahlia have started to come up. I don't dig my dahlia because I'm in zone 9B, so I just leave them in the ground. So they've come up really nicely. Just as the tulip were going off, the dahlia have started to come up. So again, really good pairings going on. Because it's a tiny garden, I have to have things overlapping with each other. But this worked out really well. Now again, yarrow and lupin are both perennials, so I'm not sure how much this is going to die back. I don't know if I'll be able to get my stock in here again next year, or I'll have to find somewhere new if this stays this bushy. That's to be seen. But for the first year where I was growing everything from seed, that worked really well. So moving to the next row is my poppy. Guys, look at these poppy. Okay, so last year in the garden I planted California poppy, the jelly bean variety, and I did not like them. I didn't like the flowers, they weren't very interesting, they were really plain, and the colours were like traffic cone orange. I got one really nice white one, but they really didn't do very much for me. They took up a lot of space and didn't give me that many flowers. So I wasn't sure what I was thinking this year. But this year I planted some Shirley poppy, Pandora, I planted a raspberry ripple, I planted some Iceland poppy, and I planted an amazing grey mix. And I love them. They're my favourite thing in the garden. I love them. I did, poppy are known for not doing very well in the vase, so I did a poppy vase life experiment, and I'll link that down below, but they did a lot better, most of them did a lot better than I thought they would in the vase, which has given me the confidence to keep growing them. Because I'd grown the jelly bean variety before, they never really got more than about 30 centimetres, and although they were bushy, they weren't massive. So when I planted these, I thought they would be similar. I was completely wrong. These guys are huge. They're absolutely giant. They're taking up so much more room than I thought they would, and we've had a lot of wind, and now we're coming into rainy season, so obviously a lot of rain. Now I've tried corralling them, as you can see here, but it's not worked as well as I was hoping that it would. So lessons learned for next time. Do I want poppy in the garden? Hell yeah, I do, and I'm going to be putting in a lot more, but I will be planting them much further apart. I'll be giving them a lot more spacing, and I'll probably be growing them through the netting, the same as I do for my stock, because they are that high and they really need the support. The good thing about the poppy is that if I don't get them when they've got the beautiful flowers just at the right stage, then they are going to go to poppy head. So I'm going to leave these in and see if these poppy head will get nice and big for me, and I can use them in dried flower arrangements later on. I did interplant these with my gladiola, which is, I'm now seeing, wasn't a great planting, because when these are falling, they are knocking the gladiola sideways, and they're kind of shading them out as well, which isn't great. So I'm hoping that I'll still get some of my gladiola coming through. I actually got one which I cut last week, and that was the first one. So I'm hoping that some of the others are going to come through, because I love my glads last year as well. But it's lessons learned. This is not a good pairing, because these are so much bigger than I thought they would be. But these are definitely coming back, just with a much bigger area, so that they have more room and a lot more support for these guys. But I love them. Love them. And then at the other end of the love spectrum, I have my sweet pea. I am killing my snapdragon. I don't get it. Everyone talks about how you should grow sweet pea. They smell amazing. They keep giving you flowers for so long. And my very first year before I actually had the allotment, I randomly put a sweet pea in my garden, and it came up, and it was the most beautiful dark magenta colour, and there was only one plant, and it filled my house with flowers for a good month and a half. I absolutely loved it, and that was me. I was like, right, definitely have to have sweet pea in the garden. And I put them in last year and they did absolutely nothing. They didn't like the cold, they were getting shocked, it didn't go well. And I ended up leaving them in too long and they took up way too much space. This year I put them in a lot earlier, I direct seeded them, they started to come up and then they kind of did nothing, and then very quickly they browned and have just died on me. And the few stems that I got off them, some of them the stem length was okay, but the vase life was just absolutely terrible, and they didn't really do anything in the vase. They weren't a filler because they're too small and they don't fill. They weren't a focal because they're not that impressive. They weren't a glittery bit because they weren't ever tall enough. They always sat kind of at the bottom. So yeah, they just weren't anything really. And on the one time where I managed to cut quite a big bunch, you could get the scent off them, but not really. The other weird thing is that I planted one row of purple and one row of red, and they all came through purple. Now I don't know if that's something to do with the nitrogen in my soil, maybe a bit like hydrangea, if there's too much nitrogen they all turn blue. I don't know, but I ended up with a load of purple sweet pea that didn't really do anything, and they take up a really big chunk in the garden. So I don't love them. I've tried, that's 3 years now that I tried. So I'm calling it quits and saying, you know what, I just don't love them enough to keep trying, and this area would be better used for something else next spring. So bye sweet pea, not staying. Nope. I am also going to include my snapdragon in my spring flowers because these guys surprised me by coming up so big and so strong so early. And I really didn't expect that, but they've been giving me flowers for almost as long as my stock have. Now I am in zone 9B, which is great. We get very hot very quickly. After February is usually cold, and after that it ramps up really quickly. So these guys have come through really, really fast, and I'll have to remember that because maybe I need to be doing 2 plantings of snapdragons to make sure that I have enough to get me through the whole season, because these are now coming onto their second flush already, and like I say, we're only at the beginning of June. So I don't know how these are going to last for the rest of the summer. Now, they didn't do great because it gets so hot here in kind of August time, so I was finding that these were kind of dying off towards the middle of summer anyway. And I do plan on putting African marigold in here, which can handle the heat a little bit better, and that'll take me right through to the end of the season. But it's good to know that in my area these come up and can be classed as a spring flower. The only bad thing about that is they started to come up just as my Ranunculus were going out, and when my anemone was kind of starting to get shorter, and it meant that basically I only really had stalk and snapdragon, which is too many spike flowers. My glads were starting to come through as well, so yeah, I didn't really have anything. I was expecting to have my Sweet William to be my kind of big filler, and to have some Geum to be that kind of twinkle, and that just didn't work out. So I ended up with lots of spikes, and there's not really much I could have done with lots of spikes. I ended up doing just lots of single stem vases, and it still looked very, very pretty, but it wasn't the kind of mixture that I was hoping for. So I'm now searching for more disc-shaped flowers or filler flowers for spring. If you have any ideas, drop them in the comments for me. What have you had success with? What can balance all of these spiky flowers out for me? Because I've got a big space where my sweet pea aren't going to be next year, so I can grow something else. Okay, so overall, I think I had a pretty good spring. Could have done better. Some things didn't work at all. Yeah. Some things I've learned from, which is the whole point, and some things went really well. So a really nice mix in there. I've definitely got some ideas of what I want to do next year. I've got a few more experiments that I want to do. I have started to see people grow pansies or viola really, really long. They're growing them under shade and getting really nice long stems on them. And that was my grandmother's favourite flower, so I'm very keen to get some of that on. So I might do that as an experiment next year and see if I can get a nice spring long-stemmed pansy to be going in arrangements, because I think that would be absolutely beautiful. I'm going to have more poppies, less sweet pea. Hopefully my Sweet William and my Geum will have perennialised by that point and be coming through a bit earlier. I need to look at some new tulip to see if I can get little long stems on them, if I'm going to put tulip in at all. Yeah, still on the fence on that one. And see if I can find some nicer colour of Ranunculus. The search goes on for a nice peachy Ranunculus in Japan, because I'm finding it absolute nightmare to get them. But that was my spring garden. Let me know how your spring garden went. What worked for you, what didn't? Did you have anything that you absolutely loved and think I should get in here? Or is there anything in here that you just don't like at all? And let me know how you are doing, and any suggestions are more than welcome. If you want to see what I did with all of the flowers this spring, you can check out my Instagram, which is From the Witch's Garden, and there's a link to that below. And if you want to see how the rest of the season goes with the flowers that are still here and the more that are going in, then please remember to hit the subscribe button. But that is all from me this week, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!